Hello, my name is Peter Richardson. I've taught many times at the OLLI program, both at Berkeley and at Sonoma State. I also taught for many years at San Francisco State University. But even before I did that, I worked as an editor at an outfit called the Public Policy Institute of California. And when I got there, I asked people, the director of research and the president and others, what should I read by way of background for this work, working on California public policy? And they all said, oh, you should read everything by Carey McWilliams. And I had never heard of Carey McWilliams. So I did my homework and I started a long reading and writing project that eventually culminated in a biography of Carey McWilliams, which was recently reissued in paperback by the University of California Press. So in many ways, the introduction to Carey McWilliams was for me, a sort of turning point in the work that I did after that. I then wrote other books on California topics, California magazines, California political journalism. So this was a kind of important project for me, and I think learning about Carey McWilliams and his life was in some ways kind of life-changing for me. So maybe we can bring a little bit of that excitement to bear on our OLLI class. Who was Carey McWilliams? So he's been described, a lot of people have never heard of him, as I hadn't, but he's been described as California's preeminent public intellectual, its most astute political observer, and the finest nonfiction writer on California ever. So that's high praise for a person that, as I say, many people have never heard of. He was a Los Angeles attorney. He was a journalist who was radicalized in the 1930s. And then he went on a tear in the 1940s, producing almost a book a year on all kinds of progressive topics. I did a history of California farm labor called Factories in the Field in 1939. I did a book on the Japanese internment that was cited 4 times in a dissenting Supreme Court opinion the very next year. He did a book on Latinos in the Southwest, on racial and ethnic prejudice. He did a book in the early 1950s on the Red Scare, just as the McCarthy era was heating up. So he was very versatile and productive during that time, during the late 1930s and all throughout the 1940s. He was also super versatile. So during this time, he headed up several commissions and legal efforts. He served in state government. He wrote briefs for Supreme Court cases. He wrote one brief, for example, for the Hollywood 10, which was a high-profile case in which directors and actors, screenwriters, producers in Hollywood were dragged before the Un-American Activities Committee in the House of Representatives. He also inspired the original screenplay for Chinatown, the movie that came out in 1940 starring Jack Nicholson. He edited The Nation magazine for 20 years. And while he was there, he introduced readers to young writers like, at that time, young Howard Zinn, Ralph Nader, and Hunter Thompson. One of the other things he did, significant things he did, was he made a lot of powerful enemies. And that included the Los Angeles Times, which had a very low opinion of him when he was living in Los Angeles. The Committee on Un-American Activities in California, which interrogated him in a closed session in the early 1940s after he had written a book called Brothers Under the Skin about history of racial and ethnic prejudice in the United States. The Associated Farmers were a big enemy because he advocated for farm workers in California. And J. Edgar Hoover, who compiled a nice big fat FBI file on McWilliams, and also put him on what was then called the custodial detention list, which meant that he could be rounded up in case of national emergency. That was later renamed the Security Index, and Thompson remained on that for a couple of decades. And that was all happening while the Red Scare and the McCarthy era was kind of taking its toll on this venerable weekly, The Nation magazine, that was started a century before by abolitionists, which McWilliams was publishing, rather editing in the 1950s and 1960s, all through almost until 1980. So while he was at The Nation, McWilliams got behind the civil rights movement, and he traced the early career of a young California congressman named Richard Nixon, whom McWilliams described as a dapper little man with an astonishing capacity for petty malice. So McWilliams was, among other things, a kind of early warning system for Richard Nixon. He also spoke out against the Vietnam War and hammered away at President Nixon and also California Governor Ronald Reagan. So in addition to tracing McWilliams's remarkable career, we'll also look at his durable legacy, especially among the people who write about California or set their works here. I mentioned, for example, that one of McWilliams's works directly inspired the original screenplay for the movie Chinatown, but he also inspired a play and then a movie called Zoot Suit by Luis Valdez. Cesar Chavez said that that McWilliams was an important part of his formal education when it came to California agriculture. And somewhere along the line, McWilliams sort of captured the city room at the Los Angeles Times. So most of the people who write about California find McWilliams and hold him in very high regard. So we're going to be looking at his legacy in that sense, but mostly I'm going to be making the case that McWilliams was one of the most versatile and consequential American public intellectuals of the 20th century. So I look forward to talking with you all about this remarkable writer and activist.